Well, I'm grateful to look back a little bit on our challenging sermon on Sunday, sermon topic, I would say, or just Bible topic in general on the sacredness of life. That's what we talked about on Sunday and really trying to understand God's heart on the issue. I mean, this is such a tender topic because it's one where not only are there differences of opinion with regard to the sacredness of life, both unborn life and end of life, lots of different opinions, but you also have people who are dealing with those things or who have dealt with them in the context of abortion and challenges associated with pregnancy that way, or folks that are sitting there and they've had to make hard decisions about a loved one who's at the end of life, and a lot of these things are very tender and very real, very personal. So it's always a tough subject that way, because it's very personal, not just a generic subject. So we did talk about try and discern God's heart on that issue, the sacredness of life, by looking at His design of us as image bearers and really examining, life, for example, in the womb. And great, I hope, great passages, challenging and encouraging, and ones that provoke thought. And some of those are associated with God being the God of the vulnerable. I think that's the best way to think of it. And I talked a little bit about that. Boy, if you had to come to some conclusion where you really don't know the details of when God, joins a soul, the immaterial part of you, that really is you, with your body, I mean, we really don't know. That's not something we can measure. God would say, be careful, especially with those who might be most vulnerable. So I wanted to say a couple more things, or just one more thing in particular, and you see this in Scripture where God uses His writers, or God says explicitly, "I'm the God of those who are hurting and the vulnerable and the helpless." For example, we looked at that passage, but also, it's one thing to care about life inside the womb. It's another thing also to care about life outside the womb. Now I'm talking about children and orphans and things like that, because it's not that far away from this topic, right? So those who would advocate, I'll do what I want to do, because if I have this child, who's able to care for this child? So, and you're not going to be there to care for my child, and I am unable to care for my child. So that maybe that's compelling to move in a direction of an abortion or something like that. So that's a worthy topic. Look at what James says, and this is Jesus' half brother, and James, in essence, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. We see. So he makes this comment in James 1:27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God. Right? So James is the one that's very practical, very practical. So religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, the first thing out of his mouth has to do with orphans, and in that culture in particular, but it's our culture too. Orphans are vulnerable. I mean, who will care for them? Who will love them? Who will provide for them when there is no parent around to do so? That's an orphan, if you want to just think of it that way. And he says, pure religion, let me tell you what it looks like. It's love of the little ones who don't have mom or dad around to love them. We didn't say much about that, but when you think about a Christian's motive and a Christian's reaction in the context of what life looked like in the womb, I've heard the accusations from the so-called other side of the fence, so to say, and they say, well, what about you caring for this life after the womb, after this child is born? And what about our foster system? And what about our orphan system? And what about our, children who don't have parents systems? Who's caring for them then? And that's a great comment to think through and pray through. Christians ought to be some of the most active in the context of caring for the most vulnerable. And that doesn't just mean those that are still in the womb, but those that are out of the womb, children, babies, little ones, where it seems like no one else is there to care for them. So that's a good comment, I think, and a good thing to think through and pray through. a good practical way to say the sacredness of life is important. Life in the womb and shortly thereafter. Christians, we ought to be active that way and care much that way.